Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today, and we have some good news to report. I know a lot of times you'll hear us come on the radio and we have things that we're concerned about, but in this case, we have some good news. So we have Mike Sharman, he's the legal counsel for Share Healthcare, on the phone with us. And Mike, you've sent me some reports and some things that we're celebrating and rejoicing over today. So I'm going to go ahead and let you dive in and share with us our first point of good news today.
Well, thank you, Doug. You know, as you pointed out, we're just inundated with the news sources giving us bad news, and then the social media echo chambers amplifying them. So what's necessary to point out is that in the midst of all that shouting, there's the quiet progression of good news occurring. We had President Trump come into office, and he pretty much immediately started doing presidential executive orders declaring that common sense has prevailed and Christianity is not a toxin. And that's basically what so many of his executive orders were about, and what he's now hoping that his agencies under the executive branch are able to begin implementing. So the first executive order, or not executive order, but the first agency memo that we want to talk about came out in the middle of July 16th, 2025. So the manager, let's say, of the employees and the agencies in the executive branch is the United States Office of Personnel Management. A lot of times you'll just hear the news call it OPM for Office of Personnel Management. And it is just exactly what it says. It's the agency who is tasked with managing all the other agencies in their personnel and human relations and employee relations. So this mid-July memo, July 16th, 2025, was on reasonable accommodations for religious purposes. So your audience may or may not remember that back on February 7th, the president did his executive order establishing the White House Faith Office. And then on May 1st, he did his executive order establishing the Religious Liberty Commissions. So this OPM memo begins by quoting some of the portions of those executive orders. Said that President Trump has made it a top priority to ensure that all executive departments and agencies honor and enforce the Constitution's guarantee of religious liberty and end any form of religious discrimination by the federal government. Specifically, it shall be the policy of the executive branch to vigorously enforce the historic and robust protections for religious liberty enshrined in federal law. Now, Doug, we could just stop right there, and that is good news. That ends the wave and the army of attacks that have been coming against Christianity, Christians, any expression of that in the workplace. But we are a First Amendment nation. We are a nation in which there's religious liberty, not just Christian liberty. But for particularly during the Biden and Obama years, non-Christian religions were pushed to the forefront, and Christianity was submerged or attacked, or to use another subword, it was viewed as subversive, literally. Well, the opposite is occurring now. Hallelujah and amen. When our motto, our national motto is "In God We Trust." And for those who really only trust money, okay, well, it's on every single bit of your money. In God we trust. So that memorandum on religious accommodation wasn't a really sweeping one, but it was trying to remove some of the problems of a person who is observably religious, that wants to practice religion in his life, and work is a problem for that. For example, on the Sabbath or holiday observances, fasting, prayer. So those are the accommodations that are being talked about here in this July 16th memo, and how a employer, the federal employer, can accommodate this while still being a good steward of our taxpayer dollars. So they said, well, telework is one of the obvious ways. that if you're wanting to observe your Sabbath or your holiday, if you can telework and still do it, okay, good. If fasting means you need to take a break every now and then or pause for prayer or rest, then you can, and by teleworking. And the same with the prayer and religious observances. But that might not be a complete way of dealing with it. So they also talk about religious compensatory time off. So let's say that you want to practice a particular holiday or an observance, or maybe you want to go to the National Day of Prayer observance for an all-day one in May. Okay. Well, you can have religious compensatory time off. You can be doing overtime beforehand, or you can do an additional day also. So they can accommodate it that way. And then there's another statute that's the Maxiflex work schedule statute that they talk about and doing that. But what is more important is the overall theme that this memo is trying to do. And they sort of wrap it up in one of the sentences towards the end of the memo. They say, upon receiving a request for religious accommodation, agencies must engage in a good faith interactive process with the employee to explore reasonable accommodations. Well, that's all a Christian or any other good faith observer of their faith should ask for, is to have an employer who's willing to listen to what your needs are and accommodate them as they can while still carrying out the mission of that agency. For too long, we've had the opposite, where the agency directors, supervisors, foremen have done everything possible to make it hard for Christians to observe their faith. So then the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, a couple weeks later, just recently, July 28th, moved one step further. Now, the last one was religious accommodation, trying to accommodate your faith. And this one is actually protecting religious expression in the federal workplace. So the first is just making what adjustments they can, but the other is actually being your defender of the faith, your defender of your faith, your defender of your faith in your federal workplace. This is pretty incredibly important. So again, it begins by quoting a number of President Trump's executive orders, his eradicating anti-Christian bias executive order, which was right there at the beginning of his term, February 6, 2025. And then again, that establishment of the Religious Liberty Commission one, which was in May. And they say, quoting those executive orders, they say, the founders established a nation in which people were free to practice their faith without fear of discrimination or retaliation by their government. President Trump is committed to reaffirming America's unique and beautiful tradition of religious liberty, including by directing the executive branch to vigorously enforce the historic and robust protections for religious liberty enshrined in federal law. So again, repeating that idea that they had in the accommodation one of vigorously enforcing our historic and robust protections for religious liberty. You know, we've just been had an attempt at brainwashing us as a nation, as a collective people, that we don't have robust protections of our religious liberty in our Constitution, in our Declaration of Independence, in our federal statutes. We've been told almost the opposite, as though you need to go lay down by your bowl. Just, sit down, shut up, be quiet, and don't disturb all of those who don't believe as you do. Well, that's not what the Constitution protects, not at all. That First Amendment has robust protections. It is the First Amendment which emphasizes its importance. The first part of the First Amendment is that phrase of that, Congress isn't supposed to either create a religion nor prohibit any religion. And then it is supposed to have a free ability for us to speak about those things that are important to us and to print and publish those things that are important to us and to gather together when we need to talk about those things and then to talk to government for our redress of our grievances when we think they aren't doing right. And on November 5th of last year, the American population gathered together and voted to redress all those grievances they had, and they voted in President Trump to do exactly what he is doing here, protect religious liberty. Of course for Christians, because that's the one that's been most set upon. But for all, we want that because Christianity will win in the marketplace of ideas if we just can get into the marketplace of ideas, if those doors aren't closed to us, if those avenues aren't shut up. So to continue on this OPM memorandum on protecting religious expression in the federal workplace, they go on to say the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution robustly protects expressions of religious faith by all Americans, including federal employees. And then they say the U.S. Supreme Court has clarified that the Free Exercise Clause protects not only the right to harbor religious beliefs inwardly and secretly, but also protects the ability of those who hold religious beliefs of all kinds to live out their faiths in daily life. Indeed, respect for religious expressions is indispensable to life in a free and diverse republic. I don't know if your audience recalls that during the Clinton era, and then particularly later in Hillary Clinton's echoes of that, let's say, there was the attempt by the Clinton arm, let's say, of the Democratic Party and then Obama and Biden to say that, well, you can have religious belief, but you can't express that in public ways. Well, that's just false. And this memorandum quoting the United States Supreme Court shows and says it is false. It is legally false. It's constitutionally false. So then they go on to say in this memo that freedom of religious expression is further protected by federal statutes, and they quote those. It says Title VII, one of the big civil rights ones, defines religion to include all aspects of religious observance and practice as well as belief, not just practices that are mandated or prohibited by a tenet of the individual's faith. So this is saying that the nuance of your faith is protected as well as the black and white letter, let's say. It protects all of the things that are stated within the Bible that you would want to be living out, not just the Ten Commandments, to put it in summary terms there. Employees, they say, must be allowed to engage in private religious expression in work areas to the same extent that they may engage in non-religious private expression. All right. So if at work you're allowed to talk to somebody about your joy that your football team, your soccer team, your baseball team had won that season or that day, then you're able to talk to your fellow employees about the joy you have of somebody you had witnessed to over the weekend who had come to faith. To the same extent that you're able to talk about your non-religious parts of your daily life, you can talk about your religious ones now. What a change. Now, they do have a however there, which makes good sense and good stewardship for those agencies. However, agencies may require that employees perform official work while on duty as opposed to engaging in personal religious observances. Okay, so in the break room, just in passing, you can chat with people about your favorite sports team. And the same thing. In the break room, and just in passing, you can talk to your fellow employees about your faith. But you can't use your federal salary job to talk about your faith all day long and forget that you're working. That just makes good sense.
Mm-hmm.
So they give some examples. You can display and use items used for religious purposes or religious icons. And how many times, Doug, have we heard of somebody being sanctioned because they had a cross, a Bible, I prayed for you today button, those type of things at their workplace, and they were told they had to take them down.
Mm-hmm.
No more. Expression by groups of federal employees is another highlighted item that they said here. So if you can, during your break time or before work or after work, if you can gather people together to play mahjong or whatever you want to do to coordinate for a lottery ticket, the way a lot of groups do, anything that you would gather together in your workplace for secular reasons, now you're allowed to gather for religious reasons. You can have a Bible study at work in the federal workplace now, before or after your work hours or during your break time. You're allowed, and they can't prohibit you from doing that if the same thing is allowed for any other secular purpose. It says conversations between federal employees They may engage in conversations regarding religious topics with fellow employees, including attempting to persuade others of the correctness of their own religious views. And again, they insert a common sense thing, provided that such efforts are not harassing in nature. Okay. You can chat with your suite mate, let's say, who's the guy in the cubicle next to you who may be Muslim, or one of the nuns. They don't believe in N-O-N-E, nun. They don't believe in anything. And you can be telling them, hey, I want to let you know there's the problems you've been telling me about your life, they won't go away, but they will be lessened if you become a Christian, because you will have the Holy Spirit prompting you this way and that way and helping you all through life. You'll have the guidebook in the Bible that will get you through so many confusing areas. And you can say that. Now, when he says, hey, I don't want to hear anymore, you can't keep repeating it, just as if you were talking to him about your ball team and he was on a fan of an opposing team and said, I don't want to hear it anymore. Well, you just have to stop. It's just polite.
Yes.
And then your fundamental rights, it says, an employee's fundamental rights as a private citizen of personal religious expression are not limited by the venue or the hearer, or merely because the employee is a government employee, and therefore may not be suppressed due to the religious nature of the expression. And then here's another common sense, however. However, when public employees make statements pursuant to their official duties, they're not speaking as citizens for First Amendment purposes, and the Constitution does not insulate their communications from employer discipline. So what's that mean? So that means if you are a Muslim and you're a fellow employee, you can't be saying in your official statement at the podium, you can't be proselytizing in that way. You can't use your position as a federal employee to speak to the public in your official capacity on those religious topics. And this is a difference. We talked in one interview before about pulpits, pastors now being free in their pulpit to speak politically. Well, that's because that's their house, their church. They're retained by their congregation. Well, a agency official is paid for by all taxpayers. That's their employer, all taxpayers of all faiths. So one, as a public official, cannot be saying in their official capacity things that would offend their taxpayers. I mean, it's just a matter of common courtesy and good sense. We might want everybody to be speaking as Christians, but that's not a real public policy official thing to be doing. We need to be changing the culture to get that, so that once again, Christianity is the commonly held set of moral values, the commonly held faith. Well, government can't do that. Our government officials, the agency heads, can't do that. They can do what these directives have just done: remove the barrier to Christ in the marketplace of ideas. And that gets us to some other items of our good news. Focus on the Family. Probably everybody knows about Focus on the Family. They had done a pretty extensive survey, the Marriage Health in America survey, looking at, what's the status of marriage in America, who's happy in their marriage, who isn't. All right, well, there's some negatives to take from this survey of the diminishing exercise of marriage. People just aren't getting married as much. All right, those are the negatives, and there's other negatives in it. But the thing we want to be pointing out is, who is happy in their marriage? Christians. Christians are happier in their marriage than anyone else. And the deeper you go into your faith, the higher degree of happiness you will have in your faith. Now, we all know folks in our church that have miserable marriages and then get divorced. But fortunately, those are not the norm. Those are the exception. And this survey points that out. The the general thing on marriage is that 74% of the people who were surveyed in this overall said that they were happy in their marriage. Well, that's pretty good. So generally overall, people are happy in the marriage, which is, again, kind of contrary to the common media that we see, the TV shows, or even Hallmark. I mean, think of how many Hallmark shows you've seen where the basic theme is somebody got out of a bad relationship and now found the love of the life, which they had left as a senior in high school, but now they meet them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, but 74% of the people who were surveyed here say they're happy in their marriage. Mm-hmm. And then when you add that element of Christ to it, it goes way up. 79% of those who say they are born again, meaning regardless of whether they go to church or not, they recognize Jesus and have accepted Jesus at some point into their life, and that they know that they're going to go to heaven. Okay, so that's how this survey defines born again. So 79% of those had said that they were happy in their marriage. 82% who are what they call convictional Christians, and convictional means is you're giving evidence that you're living out your convictions. And what that evidence is, besides that born again criteria, that you attend religious services at least monthly. All right, you go to church at least once a month. You read, listen, or pray with the Bible on your own at least weekly. And you agree with this statement: if my thoughts or actions do not line up with what the Bible teaches, the Bible is right and I am wrong. Mm. All right, so that's what they call a convictional Christian, pretty still moderate in terms of living out your faith. But with that, those convictional Christians have 82% of them say they're happy in their marriage. And when both spouses say that, when both spouses are convictional Christians, that they have 93%, 92% of those are happy in their marriage if they pray together at least several times a week. 92%. So that's how we change the culture. When you're having 92% of people in one group say that they're happy in their marriage, that gives a huge witness, a huge testimony to the rest of the world watching. And it removes so many other social pathologies. It's so good for health. It removes a lot of the poverty. It removes the pressure on the social welfare network of needing to pay for the people as they go and as they go in and out of poverty, which happens so much with split families and single parents and elderly people who are single and unsupported and haven't had the ability of a marriage, which helps you prepare for the future. All those social pathologies are just gone. Mm-hmm. And how are we going to get people into that situation where they're born-again Christians or convictional Christians? Well, music. And surprisingly, Christian music is the genre that is growing in double proportions to non-Christian music. So let me repeat that. Christian music is growing at double the rate of non-Christian music. Who would have thought? Hmm. And so one of the industry leaders in a music insight group called Luminate had said that the reason that it is that Christian music lends itself so much to streaming. It's not, because of streaming, music is no longer limited by the gatekeepers of music producers or record labels or anything like that. If you have a good song and a good group, they can stream it on their own without having a record label. Sure, having all that infrastructure of people who are going to support you and do professional music videos and all those things, that might help. But regardless of all that, Christian music lends itself well to streaming, and the younger people stream media more than they do any other type of media. And that's why one of the big reasons why. Streaming makes up 92% of all music consumption in the country. And so that makes sense as to why then it's accessible now when it had been, like I said, had the gatekeepers of the people who would produce. But youth are looking for something. They're wanting to find hope. We began this interview by talking about how much dark news there is out there and how much negative news. Well, nobody wants to hear that, especially if you're in the idealistic, hopeful generation of youth. They want to know hope. And what is Christian music other than hopeful music?
Mm-hmm.
Holly Zabka, who's the president of Provident, which is a Sony Christian music subsidiary, said, I don't think we've ever been in this season of opportunity. This is the most exciting time to be in Christian music.
Wow.
Yeah. We're feeling a deep longing, we as Christians and Christian expositors, Christian speakers, Christian music people, whatever way in which we are presenting Christ to the watching world, we're feeling the deepest longing a human has. Who am I, and who is God, and how do we connect? That's our deepest longing.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I, who is God, and how do I connect with God? When we do that, we'll see that change in the culture that is being helped by these executive orders and opium memos. But they aren't going to continue if we don't increase and perpetuate the Christian faith.
I heard one of the leaders of Focus on the Family say a few years ago that someone had criticized them, saying, why are you focusing on the family? Why don't you do something about something really important like poverty? And they answered, well, we are literally doing something about poverty because if we can keep marriages and families together, then there's less poverty.
Oh, absolutely. The greatest determinant of whether or not you will live as an elderly person, wealthy, and die wealthy is, were you married? The single most common denominator, let's say, the single most common characteristic of millionaires is they're married. So we can go on, and we have in other interviews, too, about the health benefits of marriage. But, yep, if Benjamin Franklin, long time ago, was saying, if you wanted the healthy, wealthy, and wise is wake up early in the morning. Well, yeah, healthy, wealthy, and wise wake up in the morning early next to your marriage partner.
Yes. That's good. Well, we're talking with Mike Sharman. Mike, you're the legal counsel for Share Healthcare. What is Share Healthcare?
Well, it's a 501c3 Christian nonprofit, and its specific ministry is helping Christians share the medically necessary medical expenses of each other. So it's one more way of living out our Christian muscle that's been atrophied for so long. And it shows the watching world in another way how the benefits of being convictional Christians, to use the phrase that we've been discussing today. Convictional in which way? That we actually believe the Bible and we're willing to risk it. Share Healthcare is not insurance, so therein lies the risk. It's not insurance. It's not a contract. It's a covenant with other Christians who are part of it that we're going to share. Well, what is it we share? A single person would share $149 per month. A couple would share $249 per month, and a family would share $349 per month to go into our collective sharing for the medical needs of the other people in it. And then Share Healthcare administratively goes over the bills, reprices them, because nobody pays retail. I mean, as in nobody pays retail of a medical bill. And we got it down 40 to 60% of what that retail cost would be. And that's why we're $149, $249, $349 per month, as opposed to the average of $2,600 per month for a family of four across the nation for an employer-provided health insurance. So when the small businessman says, well, I'm having to pay $2,600 for every one of my employees, or an employee might say, well, my employer pays $1,300, I pay $1,300. What do you pay? Well, we pay $349. Oh, and your employer pays the other three? No, it's just the total of $349. Oh, how come? Well, are you a Christian? No. Well, let me tell you about Christ. We'll work on it from there. That's what Share Healthcare is all about.
Well, if people would like more information, what do they do?
Well, go to our website, sharehealthcare.com, sharehealthcare.com, and write down your questions and then call Share Healthcare. I'm sorry, I was about to repeat the website again. They can call 1-844-SHARE-HC, 844-SHARE-HC.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of good news today, and maybe that's good news for your healthcare situation is Share Healthcare. Find more information at sharehealthcare.com or give them a call at 1-844-SHARE-HC. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.